slight quibble with the CA baseline. And the way that it works either with IG Publisher
Yeah.
or with Sushi, but I can talk about that if there's time.
Yeah, let me add it. So this is like it's a like the authoring quibble, or is it around like consuming it and trying to leverage the artifacts?
It's like I have a dependency which I've just removed on the CA baseline because of the way I think IG Publisher works when you use the short form for like codes, like when it goes code system hash blah 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 code
Okay.
doesn't work. But yeah, I can talk about that. And I don't know, it may just be a me thing.
Okay. What was the let me add it to the agenda. I actually think if you're comfortable talking about it, we can maybe swap the items, because if there's something where it's like, because we are going to be in ValueSet land today. And so I think this one is a little bit more of a like extended activity. So maybe it's a take a look at where some things are holding up peers, and if there's some things that we can actually change about the way that we're constructing some of our value sets to make it easier on that dependency. Was there a particular, if I go to our value sets, a particular code system or value set that you were getting the error on that you want to talk about and contextualize?
So what it is, and I'm not on my laptop right now, I'm just on my phone, so I can't share my screen. But when, for instance, you have the GHN for patient, and the way it's set up is probably like $ V2 203 or something like that, hash JHN. It's like that compact notation that
No.
FHIR has. And I've noticed that whenever I'm extending a resource that uses that, and then I make a restriction on it, like I change the type version to 00 or something like that, then I end up with extra properties instead of restricted properties. And then if I change the $V2-0203 hash JHN to like the two separate parts, the system and the value, then the problem goes away. And I think it's probably a defect in IG Publisher, but it may be a defect somewhere within the sushi that's taking place. And
So
like I say,
you're
so
reslicing a slice that's been defined in an upstream
yes.
profile. Okay. I don't remember the solve for this, but I remember Randy Thomas, we talked to Lexi a little bit about this with the JHN slice in the past. Do we remember how we ended up resolving it? Because I know you guys are looking at and it was something that was happening in Fish, but not in JSON. So
Yeah.
when we reprofiled it, and if you were reprofiling it like in the standard form without Fish, there wasn't like the same rendering challenges. I don't know if it was an error that we experienced, but I remember there was a clear rendering issue where it wasn't carrying through some of the original properties. When we tried to, like, we were rendering it in Simplifier at the time.
Right.
So, Randy
And that's where
Thomas, is this
in my
some?
case, because I'm not sure if I'm going to end up um using Fish and sushi when we go live, or if we're going to move into Simplifier. For now, I've just dropped the dependencies with the CA baseline, and everything's fine because now I have control over how the slicing takes place.
Yeah.
So it's not really a problem, but if there's a solution, I'd be curious to know what it is.
So is that, I don't know, is the cause the fact that you're trying to reslice on top of the baseline? Because I know that we're using Fish and Sushi and the IG Publisher with the baseline with no problems. So it may be got to do with the nuances of reslicing. I don't know.
It's not, it may be reslicing, but what it is on top of taking a dependency on that resource and then inheriting the slice, I'm also trying to add restrictions to remove some of the pieces that, like the version or whatever, the user selected, something like that, that I don't need. And when I do that, what happens is I end up with extra copies of them just in the tree view with a cardinality of 0, 0, which isn't what I wanted. So it may be just a cosmetic thing. I'm not sure, but it's certainly a pain in the butt. So like I said, I'd already kind of dropped some of the dependencies to the CA baseline. I'm like harmonized or aligned or something like that, but I'm not actually dependent on it. And that fixes my problem for now. But
Can
I'm curious
I-
if other people have seen this kind of behavior.
Yeah. Thomas, Randy, Sandra, I'm pretty sure the PSAB is public now, right? Let me just make sure. It is.
I remember this stuff, but I just don't remember where we saw
Okay,
it.
I have it. I have if you're comfortable with me, I have like the actual, this is how we ended up dealing with the slices constraining issue. I don't have it in Fish, but I have it in JSON if you're comfortable, like it is a public page, so if you're comfortable with me showing it. Or if you're not uncomfortable, here's what I'll say. Sheridan Cook, independent contractor, found a similar problem online where we've sliced for identifier in another profile, namely PSEA. We have a JHN slice that was sliced pattern on type, right? So this is the PSEA version. And we had an established constraint that, you know, obviously as we were slicing, we were saying, here's the slice and what it's supposed to mean. And when another profile wanted to then further constrain a rule for that slice or like and apply additional must supports, they used slices constraining. So without redefining the slice itself, and I'd have to see how it was done in Fish, but I think what we did was we did it in Fish and then translated it into JSON. And the rule was we had to use slices constraining. I think we couldn't redefine the slice and we had to jump right into the notation of what was the elements that were changed.
Okay.
Let me just see if this, 1 second. So I know it's possible.
Well,
And when it's done this way, I'll show you how it renders. Like you do end up like seeing everything, which is desirable, right? With the new information as well. So,
Yeah.
it may be some combination of how it's being modeled in Fish as well as maybe IG Publisher, but I think that this was working in IG Publisher in much of the same way.
Yeah. Okay, that does make sense. And it certainly has something to do with the way the slicing is taking place.
Yeah, I know like it was a frustrating thing at first because it was trying to interpret like basically like it didn't know if we were doubling up on slices when we started to define them in the child profile.
Yeah.
Is trying to leverage the ones that it would be inherited from the parent from reprofiling. But we ended up with something that at minimum, when you translate it into JSON, had the desired impact.
Yeah.
So it is
And
possible.
I think that the takeaway for me is that even though the right thing to do may be to extend either the CA baseline or the CA core when it's ready to create new profiles, there may be some challenges with slicing that other people run into where it's just like it's I think slicing is a black art and that may be prohibitive.
Yes,
I
like,
would
Go ahead, Alan.
agree with that. I'm not convinced of some of the explanations I'm hearing. So I would like to play around with the challenge you're running into and see, because well, first of all, it's easy enough to tell if it's a sushi issue or a publisher issue because you can look in the fish generated directory and see what's coming out of it. And if that's valid and is expressing what you're trying, then it's not a sushi issue, it's going to be the publisher. So that's easy enough to distinguish. I'm I'm wondering if it, yeah, no, I don't have anything further. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the ideal solution is just dropping your dependencies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly, we've been trying in the stuff I've been doing in VC to maintain those dependencies. Of course, there's other ways of imposing external profiles and things, but it's probably useful for diagnosing and debugging what's going on. I don't think it's the first choice solution.
Yeah. Like I say, if I knew that we were going to continue forward using fish, then I would spend more time trying to make this work the way I want it to work. But I may find out, a month from now that, oh, well, we just need to put it on simplifier, in which case I'm not as concerned about it because it's going to be kind of like re-implementing it anyways.
Well, I
Well,
would
not
say that even
necessarily.
if you're moving to simplifier,
Oh, like
expressing it in
yeah.
fish is
Yeah.
a lot simpler than in JSON.
Mhm.
Yeah, and certainly as what we've been doing is using a combination of fish and targeting publishing simplifier. So I think that's a whole separate internal question. But just because simplifier comes in the mix doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up on fish.
Yeah.
That's true. That's all good. I'm taking a lot of notes here, but yeah, I'm happy with what I've learned at this point. That gives me a lot to go from.
Yeah.
So thank you. I
So-
appreciate it.
Let us know. So I posted, I thought, no, in some point in time, we were trying to do the translation. So I think that's what I put in chat is what ended up translating to the JSON that we displayed earlier, but give it a go and see if that resolves your issue. I know, Thomas, you've got your hand raised. Is it on this particular topic?
Yeah, I just may just say that on this specific topic, but a very high level. And just sorry that I didn't catch it. Your really specific question there, but my understanding is relevant to the slicing issues there. So just share some my understanding might not be correct 100%, to just for information. First, the fish is more like a translator than interpreter. That's my understanding. So that, in other words, actually for regarding the FHIR profile, the format can be accepted as treated as official recognizable deliverables are JSON, XML, or Turtle. That's my understanding so far. If you go to the HL7 International website, you can see the three format there, right? Second, and the snapshot is always very important, maybe not directly relevant to this question, but snapshot always very helpful. And also, I would say regarding the limit of a JSON file format representation, because it's a very lean metadata, I found there's my personal opinion experience here. There's some issues more like treated as a systematic issues there when we try to profile into the JSON format and compare with XML. So again, come back to slicing there, I would say it's a really challenge for me to learn it. So far, I'm still learning, especially from extension perspective. The extension resource still slicing, and how to reslicing the extension is a challenge for me right now. And so in that manner, I would say, if you really want, you can just post your question on the Zooloop and hope that other folks and their expert, quite a lot of experts there, they might help you to figure out a solution there. Just stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that Zulip is the place to go for feedback. But you may be asked to, actually share your instance or, point to a GitHub repo so people can look at it. So just be prepared for that.
So it's when dealing with inheritance. However, like the challenge that you rate, I'm just gonna like summarize, is maybe more driven by, I'm just gonna say tooling, because we aren't totally sure where, or maybe is unclear whether it's based on tooling or modeling. But takeaway is that like troubleshooting maybe with
Sorry, just want to add in extra little bit of information I recall from the Zulu discussion actually, and about extension slicing, and the general rule there I heard from those folks is define discriminator first before you really go slicing process.
Mm.
the other 2 cents I want to throw in here, and I know we've talked about it in the past, is that we, especially as like when we started and we originally were saying, okay, here's how to utilize the baseline, we gave folks like 4 different options. One was, dependency, one was reprofiling, one in dependency meaning, you leverage a lot of the same artifacts, but you don't necessarily reprofile all your profiles. One was reprofiling, one was asserting alignment to, and one was like making there's a 4th layer to the axes, and it was a different type of assertion, but it wasn't a technical one. Oh no, it was asserting that your instances were valid to both baseline and your profile. As additional specifications have entered into the community that are more use case driven, and as we've understood that there are also like extensions that are now going to be available to us that allow for us to impose baseline rules without having to reprofile. While I think as a general statement, I agree with if you run into the challenge, don't just jump to removing your parent from your base definition. What I will caution is if the system that you're building has a better parent, like a use case driven parent, or eventually if your system will depend on the core, if it's more like use case generic, to like be aware of that and to like prepare for that. So like for example, if you were building a system on patient summary, my recommendation wouldn't, you'd have the same modeling that we have in the baseline as we have in the PSA today around identifiers. But I'm always just cautious to say like, we have better evolved mechanisms now to say, oh, I'm imposing the baseline and reprofiling from the thing that's the closest to what I'm trying to accomplish, if that exists and is out there for you. But that's just my like
Sheridan, you're referring to the new impose profile extension,
exactly. Yep. Yeah. That may also be a boon in some of these cases where the idea is it will validate the rules of the imposed profile without necessarily having to like while keeping your structure of what you select for your parent.
Yeah.
Profile.
That's very new. I don't have a sense yet for how fast it's being taken up in tooling, like in Smile. So that's something that we'll have to watch.
Yes, and I think in the same vein, like I think folks that have started to reprofile from the baseline, like also it's something in like the last couple of years, like we understand it as a mechanism, but the full breadth of what does that mean if you encounter challenges, and what should you do if you come across modeling that actually prevents you from doing what you want to accomplish, like also has maturity considerations as well. So I would push us when you're trialing these things to continue to try to utilize some of these extensions. Obviously, like that is everybody's consideration in production, what you end up using. But if you're in the stage where you're like, you're testing this, you're testing whether or not validation suites can perform the checks you're desiring, that prior to production, it's a great opportunity to see if, hey, is this extension working, particularly for a base or a baseline artifact? Because I think that is the direction the community is moving in for base artifacts. Okay, that's my soapbox on that front. So I think the takeaway being probably some additional troubleshooting. Will you let us know, peers, how things shape up on one of the next profiling or governance calls after you have a chance to play around with it a bit more?
Yeah, I'll do that for sure.
Perfect.
And thanks for the time. I really appreciate all the guidance. And I think that's one of the values of this group as well, is just people who have seen the things before, even though I may not have been in attendance when that happened. You know what I mean? Like, I think these kinds of things will come up as more and more people adopt the baseline dependence.
And I think there's a really big brain share that we have, and that I'm hoping to tap into today for our other topic, because, you know, I think sometimes like we will know part of the step to a process, but not the full one. And so the second topic that we had on the agenda today was essentially actually trying to apply one of the options that we had discussed for sub value sets in the past and see if we can take it to its conclusion to like actually see if it validates the way that we think it's going to. But that's going to rely a little bit on this brain trust to help fill in some gaps for me where we can. So I'll give people a refresher a little bit about where we left off. So the last governance call, we basically said, hey, people in the implementation community are noting that it can be sometimes challenging to work with value sets, particularly stub value sets that are just a pass-through artifact, but that doesn't have any like versioning or date-based information, because its only intent is to act as like this human landing page that like connects the human to the how to actually go and retrieve the data in a FHIR format. And so we're talking about, well, what are our options, right, for dealing with the fact that we have some value sets that have that structure where they're like a pass-through that may be challenging for validation suites to interact with for, you know, a number of different reasons. And we try to outline what we thought our options were to try to get ahead of this challenge, because it would be one that we would face in the baseline, and identified really 3 options. The first option having potentially like 2 variations, and said, you know, I think we can talk about this theoretically, but some of these that we prefer or are preferring right now, also we would need to feel confident that the tools do what we think they do. And this was particularly for, I think it was for 1B, before we would feel confident, and I'll zoom in so you guys can see the little writing, applying this basically to say like, hey, if we think this is a fix, can we do things on our behalf to actually validate whether or not this fixes the problem, and whether or not it can catch, like a validation tool can catch if the rule is broken, if an expectation is broken, if we apply this structure for modeling our stub value sets. And so a lot of our options were kind of like live with the, like a compromise either on the human readability side of things or on the technical side of things. And we thought 1B seemed like maybe the closest compromise to being able to maybe accomplish both, but it was based on this assumption that it would work this way if we applied it. And so I've tried to set up my environment right now to test this as best as I can. And I actually haven't seen the results yet, so I'll be really curious about it. And I wanted to walk through what my steps were for trying to do it with an IG publisher, and then pull on this community to see, like, is there a way to test this in some of the other tools without a package? So I'll talk you guys through the option, and then I've got a slide that just walked through like what my current set of steps that I've deployed to try to test this. So basically we have this stub value set healthcare provider role type that has when defined in the baseline. So we have a binding on our practitioner role profile that points to this on practitioner role code. And this is a, this is the canonical for this actual value set that we then recreated in the baseline as kind of like an empty structure that basically said, go here and look at this. What we were proposing as an alternative, rather than just like this pass-through structure, was effectively a value set that uses, that like is defined with a CA baseline canonical. So it's different in that sense. But that uses compose include value set as in hopes that it would allow for the validation tool to hit a terminology server where this thing actually lives. So trying to take it a step further and saying, well, here's the human readable way of interacting with it and understanding this value set, but also here is the breadcrumbs that the validation tool needs to do to actually check against this, because we put it into like a structured field. And so the changes to try to test this, I'll talk you through like at least how I understand how to do this in IGP, and please poke holes in it, because I think that's the point of us trying to evaluate if this works this way. Was to basically make a copy of the original value set just for this test, right? So I gave it a different canonical, not just giving it a baseline canonical, but also separating it by giving it this test. Because I don't quite know how we're going to do this with an Inferno validator yet, I removed my other sub value set to keep it from, to keep my IG publisher program from like using my stub that has the canonical already as a fallback. So I removed that in my baseline project temporarily. I made a copy of the profile that like nominates this binding. And then like I pointed that binding to this value set here and forced it to check against it by putting a required terminology binding strength. And so the goal being, hey, can we basically create this fake profile where the only thing we do is check to see if we create a value set that has this compose include in it, and we make that required, and then we create an example that intentionally breaks it, will the validation tool, at least the component that IGP uses, will it pick up and be able to kind of execute the second step, which is to call a terminology server and check, basically, and then say, yes, I checked your example and actually it's not correct. The last thing that I think has to be in place to make this work, and again, let me know if you think we're missing a step, is that if we're calling out to an external terminology server, we have to modify, there's a file, there's a parameter in implementation guides that you can put into your, if you're running IG Publisher, called terminology settings, that basically says, well, what's the terminology server you'd like me to validate this against? So I added that, I created the file, I'll show you guys that in a second, and then I added it to the IG file as a parameter that I was calling out. So what that actually translates into, I'll show you the actual, okay, so here was the test profile, right? Different canonical, but otherwise it's just trying to enforce this structure that says you have to, if you're going to claim conformance to this profile, your instance has to come from this value set. And then this value set that I've defined here with this required binding basically says, well, the contents of this include everything from this one. And then my terminology settings, this is the thing I haven't done yet. And I'm hoping that I can tap into you guys to try to figure out what our step is to see if we can actually apply the pan-can terminologies server inside of our terminology setting file. But the theory is that if we have that defined, we put the parameter here in the IG, and we have, where is that guy? I had him a second ago. Let's see. If we have the actual terminology settings file here, this was just like one that I had that's looking at SNOMED right now. But I think the idea is that if we modify this and that the terminology server, the pan-Canadian level can be called, that will tell us whether or not IG Publisher is actually going to be performing the check. It only tests it on one system, but I think the logic is sound. And I know that was like 5 steps. Is there a step that other people are thinking, like, in order to test whether or not the tooling suite is actually going into this, that we're missing in that scenario? Oh, I guess the other thing is, I talked about it verbally, but I didn't actually show you guys this. I also made an example that blatantly broke the rule, right? And claimed conformance to the profile that we're using for this isolated test. So I said, here's the example. Yes, I'm claiming conformance to this, but then I don't put a required binding that I don't provide a value that is part of the required binding in the test profile. So I think that should, if we haven't skipped a step, and if we can successfully figure out what to put here to call the pan-can terminology server, then this will, I think, tell us whether or not the IG publisher can interact with an external server and use the structure that we're hoping works. I pulled up these details. So I got us to that point, and I was like, okay, I don't actually know what to put in here. Like, I know what it's supposed to be if we're calling like a SNOMED version, and we can do that as a backup, but I don't know what to put in to have this call the API. And I figure we could probably try a couple different things. Has anyone done this? Like, has anyone interacted, like plugged in terminology settings and like are pointing to the pan-can terminology server yet?
No,
On my list of things to do, and I know that an auth token is required, so that's
It
going
is.
to use
Okay.
some complications.
Dang, okay. Is there a non-production one that doesn't require an OAuth token?
Not that I know of, and most of the InfoWave folks are off this afternoon.
Okay. And that's like, so when we say the OAuth token, if I'm already logged in, this is a dumb question, but I'm gonna ask it. So this is when we say an OAuth token is required, meaning like my IG publisher has to be able to call like the auth server first, acquire a token, and then provide it. Or if I'm logged into Terminology Gateway and InfoCentral and I've done all the single sign-on stuff. Like,
I believe it's the former because even if you call using Postman, you need to provide that as a token.
got it. Okay.
But
That's
again,
okay.
yeah,
So-
there's more to investigate, but that's my understanding for now.
So let's say, we probably can't test like with specifically the pan-can terminology server right now. But when we do, and if we were to get this resolved, would it be like this one, production FHIR? Like, would this be like the endpoint? If
I
for
believe so.
terminology settings file?
I believe so, but I haven't tested it.
I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna see. I'm gonna see.
Okay, yeah.
yeah, it's either that one or the authoring one, but
All right, we're gonna try it. We're just gonna see. Go ahead. Elliot, were you saying
I
something?
don't think this is the right file.
Which, was it a different param that we wanted to do?
Yeah, I'm just looking at, there is also a FHIR settings, FHIR-settings.json, which tells you which servers to use.
Is that in my cache or is it in a project?
It is in, yeah, your FHIR cache,
Okay, so let's
username /.fire. Except it looks to me to only support where to get packages and not where to get what terminology servers to use. The other thing is the -tx option on the command line.
is another way of defining which terminology server you're hitting. I thought that
Yeah,
I'm pulling up this one right now. So I'm pulling up implementation guide parameters. I thought when we did this within IPS and IPA, we used the terminology settings
but
parameter.
that one I think was saying on the terminology server that you were talking to, use this version for SNOMED CT. So select the Canadian SNOMED version rather than international, I believe.
Got it. Okay.
And we just run into some funky stuff with that. That if you specify not the international SNOMED CT and then the Canadian flavor of it, it doesn't work.
With that terminology settings defined that way?
Yeah, you can't go directly to the SNOMED CTCA. You have to go to SNOMED CT and then say use the .ca version.
Which I think is how we were set up before I made the swap. So like that is, I think, what if my default is going to SNOMED CT.
I think without the 2000, without the numbers, I think is what you had to use.
Isn't this the
Do
version?
you remember, Thomas, what Andre was saying?
Can't remember. It's the long.
Well, it was end of
String.
last week, beginning of this week, and there was a big long discussion. So
Yeah.
but I think it
that
was
I
without the
believe
number.
is the
And
variant.
sure, then I did remember we have this similar discussion in the IPS call, which is arise from the PSCA. Do you still recall any other solutions about this? Which is as Randy mentioned, we know where now it is the canonical URL for SNOMED CT Canadian edition.
I thought that this is where we landed on. I'm just gonna see because I think that this is the Canadian edition
It is.
version, and that when we ask them how we specify, like that we want, yeah. So here's the Canadian French module. That this was the construct, which was define your terminology. So add this as a parameter into your guide, define it, and then I don't know where it's pulling the fact that the default should be SNOMED CT to begin with, though.
Well, it's saying that for snowmed.info/sct, use this version of it.
Oh, got it. So this is like the target, like when you, so I could actually have multiple system versions. And so I would have like Loink, and then this could be whatever the versioning, should they choose to do it this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does it work?
If the server you're talking to supports multiple versions.
Okay. So does it work?
Well, we can
You-
do our test actually, because like I think that the default it's calling THO. Is it calling THO by default, IG Publisher?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we could do is basically, instead of the practitioner role test one that we did, we could make it bind to something that we knew existed in this edition. Value set that existed. Let me think about this. Well, my thinking was that we could make it check this But what would we put into the value set definition? Because there's not a value, like, I don't think maybe I'm wrong, but I didn't think that the SNOMED CTCA naturally has value sets that are published against the addition in THO, right?
It does on Gram server.
It does, okay.
I only expect to just the URI past the validation, not the code itself.
And what we want to validate is whether or not the code itself can.
That's not actually outside of my expectation because that will relevant to the licensing and other things.
Like I know when you use like HTML validator, you can do a -sct to specify the specific edition you want to use for that. But I don't think that similar parameter applies for a publisher.
Okay, I'm going to circle back to what Elliot, so just in thinking about nominating a terminology server, actually no, that when I think about it, until we have an example that both exists on a terminology set that exists on THO and is a value set, that's what I think is going to be required to test this before there's a production API available. Let's see. Okay. I know I'm like, but even if I do this in command line, Elliot, like we still have the problem of we have to get a value set that's going to be on that server that we're hitting. And we have to like, and so if it's SNOMED, then there has to be a value set in SNOMED defined to check against that we can put as the target here, right? Is that making any sense?
That value set needs to exist on that server.
And so like at
And it
minimum,
should if the info, well, so if we try pointing it at the InfoWay server, then if we try pointing it at the InfoWay server, it should have that value set on it.
yes, if we can access it with Authenticate. So maybe it's twofold, is like CLI might get us to, here's how you nominate a different terminology server, which is valuable in itself. And then we also have to do this second step, which is to find a value set on a nominated terminology server. So let's take a look at let's look at this together, because clearly I use, I don't like using command line to run publisher. It's been a while. So, okay. So I think I should be all set up for what I need to do, but let's take a look at what it's this FHIR settings one. That is the param that's run the settings in the file specified. See FHIR settings section. Okay. When starting this in command line, it can be directed to use a particular FHIR settings JSON. So I'm guessing that we'll have to create that, which contains global settings throughout.
So
This looks like it's happened like this is my user.FHIR, I think.
no. So this is saying run publisher to build this, to build my -IG. That's the IG you're feeding into publisher.
Yep, but then if this is supposed to be in a location where it impacts all of my projects, then this file should be created where?
So I think you can specify a location and it will pick it up from where you specify.
Okay.
If you don't specify a location, it will pick it up from your FHIR cache.
Okay. So let's just see.
By default.
What's in the setting one? So this is the example. This is like if I was creating the settings file locally somewhere. This is the example I'm supposed to be using. This looks different than what I'm used to seeing for parameters.
It
But
is
this
because
is
it's
a
not
parameter.
parameters. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's try it. That's what we're here for, right? Okay. So let's just say I'm going to create this. This is why I'm really glad we record these, because I'm probably going to need this like a year from now. And it's like, it'll be nice if we have this to fall back on to remember how we did it. Okay, so for the example, do I actually have to replace user, or is it just like it is the user, it's me?
No, you would have to replace user, but you're not telling it to look anywhere special for NPM. You're not telling it to look anywhere special for Ruby or test cases or the diff tool or the temp path. I think the only thing you might be interested in is the package management.
Okay.
So this is, I have used this before to point at a corporate package manager rather than packages.fhir.org.
Got it. Okay. And so even though it's package management, the idea is that we would use this as a setting for terminology as well.
Well, one of the things in this file is setting up the authentication. You keep going down. Server type, okay, and then you can get into the authentication for that server. I am skeptical whether it actually will work. Because this really is looking for package surfers. So when it goes out to download to go download your dependency on CA baseline, that's where it would pull it from.
But there has to be another way to nominate a terminology server.
Right, so in this, on that page,
Yeah.
there is a -tx option described.
On this one, sorry. Or the Cyrus.
Yeah, it's that page. Under installation basic operations, build mode operations, yeah, -tx there.
Okay.
And so that's how you can point it at a different terminology server. But I don't see a way that you can tell it how to use that server particularly for or to specify a package, to specify a password on that server.
Got it. So if the server has authentication, we need not just to provide this, but we also need to provide it a way to pass the token.
Right.
Okay.
And that's what I'm not sure about, whether there's a capability. I seem to recall there having been a discussion that terminology servers don't yet, or IT Publisher doesn't yet support terminology servers with passwords or authentication on them. But what you can do is you can set up a proxy on your own machine so that any requests for that terminology server automatically get those HTTP headers added into the request before they leave your machine. Which sounds like a trivial little task to set up. Not at all. I mean, it's probably quite straightforward once you figured it out, but it would take a little figuring out.
Interesting. Okay. So what that leaves us with is I think it's something that I want to continue exploring to try to get the PanCan terminology server baked in and to get, but I think maybe it makes sense when we've got folks that are back on site that are helping with the terminology server, they can help us maybe even set this up and trial it and maybe see if we could force things in with this, or I don't know, find someone
Yeah.
who can do the proxy thing.
I mean, I could probably do it, but not in the next 8 minutes.
Yeah. So okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna note a separate thing, which is can terminology testing with server. So desire to do this similar test and can terminology server. However, currently it has authentication behind access. Therefore, using the TX alone, IGPs won't be enough. In future sessions, we want to explore basically like one, which would be seeing if we can specify auth information using the package settings link, or using FHIR settings. To using the proxy approach Elliot mentioned for like redirection, or no, for adding
Authentication headers. Yeah.
a non-fraud, non-authenticated so really like 2, 3, like there's, and I'm guessing this is something that interests other people too, because it's obviously needed in the baseline, but also is probably something that the rest of us are looking to do as well. So I think having this be a kind of like a track on its own that we're pushing, while maybe we work to see if let me just pull up to see if there's a value set that we can quickly test what we've already got set up with.
So one thing, if we don't get a way to do I guess a pass through to an authenticated service, you're going to be able to add more than one validation server, or authentic, more than one terminology server. Because for example, let's say we have the Alberta space, we have Alberta terminology server and the Canada server for the ones that are Canada terms. Either we got to hit the Alberta one and pass it through to Canada, or we got to be able to hit both and log into both, for example, assuming we had an Alberta one, which we don't yet. But I can see that situation happening everywhere. Eventually, it's like you'll have
It's
terms sort of
definitely going to happen in BC for sure.
yeah, and so we need to be able to connect to 2 or 1 to pass.
And I thought that part of the I think someone put that in the chat. Part of the goal in not making THO a dumping ground in the next year was to allow for guidance on that info, like what would that look like to have essentially a terminal, like some type of proxy or something in the middle that would allow for you to go out to more than one terminology server. I don't know where that stands with HL7. I know it's something that when Graham first introduced this concept of like, hey, moving away from THO is, you know, where we have to put everything. That was a necessary ask from some of the other affiliates, but I don't know where we stand on like whether or not that's been built in yet.
Yeah, I think what that is he was going to develop a way to say this server is authoritative for various code systems or value sets. And you would IG Publisher would go out, find out who was authoritative for that, and make the request to it.
Oh, not
So-
like a federated multiple request situation.
That's my recollection.
Bam. Okay. All right. We might have to circle back on that one because I agree with Randy. Like, we definitely need an approach and the infrastructure to support both local and national terminology services. Circling back to what's the value set that we can test against, I've just pulled up THO and like I'm thinking the way that we at least make, like we check the first point is to just plug in something that we know lives on THO as a value set and make it like make that what we include in the compose include. That's the least strings attached way I can think of to check the original question that we had. So I was just seeing if there's anything. I mean, we can really put like, I don't love this, but because it's just a test, we might be able to get away with just something that is close enough, even though it would never be the actual value set that we desire. So let's see. I'm going to try it just because we're here and we got kind of close. So the terminology settings we said don't matter in this case. What does matter is that this points to a value set that exists outside of this project. And the binding points to this and is required. And our example does not include the thing, a value in the value set in the terminology server that is expected. So I'm going to run it and I'm going to see if we get anything come out of this in the next 2 minutes. I don't want to jinx myself, but my baseline one has been running kind of fast today. So we'll see if we can get an answer shortly. If you have to drop, please go ahead and drop. But I think that hopefully we can have an answer on one of these.
While that's building, Ken, is the InfoWay terminology server using OntoServe?
It is.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right.
Are you dabbling with proxies right now?
I'm about to.
Bless you for that. Okay, let's just see. I'm just gonna get my output folder ready. So what I would expect if we didn't miss a step and if this is successfully calling THO and navigating the way we've created this value set, we will get an error from our example that we can look at in the the QA file of the output. That's a hypothesis if we did it right and the capability is there, at least within the IG Publisher suite. But let's see. It's got to be pretty close. Knock on wood, but Let me just check. Okay, so we did change that. We saved it. That doesn't match the required code system. And this didn't need to change because it was the binding. Oh, it must be checking this for a different profile that we have.
Looks like not found.
Yeah, but I just remembered, I think the reason it's checking this, even though our profile that's a test one doesn't target this one anymore, is because we have like another practitioner role registry one that is trying to find it at the original one. So I think this is just because I decided to run this test in my existing CA baseline project, which has another profile that cares about this value set. Let's see. I'm very hopeful. And then I think depending on what the outcome is at our next, so Mike's going to help with the next profiling call this coming Friday. Going to talk through what we found out with the invariant troubleshooting when we brought it to the Zulip thread, and asked for the group to agree on what we want to do moving forward in terms of our options. The next governance call, I think what we'll probably do is, if this works the way we think we want to decide how this now matches up against some of our other options, depending on what the outcome is. Obviously we can't make that after we're already 4 minutes over on our current governance call, but we can at least take a peek to see what happened. Okay, so this has this example. This, yep, has that code that does not match the required value set. Oh, it's probably still the QA files along the last ones. Okay. Let's take a look at this. None of the codings provided are in the value set test, and a coding from this value set is required. Okay, so they're basically saying, so I think the way that so I'm going to take a screenshot of this. And I think the way we pick it up in our next governance call is see, so we've tested the intentional failure. I want to see if we get it right, whether or not this error goes away. If we provide something in THO, through this mechanism, it goes away. Because I think that's what proves our hypothesis that option 1B is possible if we get all the servers set up the way that we want them to. Are folks comfortable with us leaving it there, or are you in suspense to see if we can confirm it? I mean, it's totally up to you guys if you want to stay on for 5 more minutes. Should we leave this as here's what I'll say, so that everybody shows up to our next governance call. You can just wait in fetid anticipation. We'll pick up with the positive test on the next call and the next governance call. And then we'll, depending on what we see, make the decision from there. And then you guys can go and start your long weekend soon. All right. I'm going to end the core recording, and I will see you guys 2 weeks from now. Mike's going to run the next one. So if you are curious about that invariant and have an opinion about it, please join next Friday's profiling call. All right. Thanks, folks.